Greetings, adventurers. Welcome back. Apologies for the delay in doing this particular video. Things have been a bit busy. And also apologies for the sound quality in the last part of my campaign update. I think I realised what happened. I think because I was having to hold my phone, I'd put my finger over the speaker microphone bit for a few minutes. So my apologies. So part 9, where we left off, basically they had got back to town with the body of the dragon, which they'd sold to potentially the villain in the campaign, who knows? And that's kind of where we ended it. The next chapter ended up with them talking about how to get in through that sealed door, that arcane locked door. And they ended up talking to a dwarf in the tavern. After all, if you're going to look for means of rock working or stone working and mining, dwarves are your best option. And they kept talking about basically trying to smash the door in, and big picks and things like this. And the dwarf quite rightly said, you're probably better off with a hammer. Picks is for sort of basic work. You want to put a door in, just put a bloody door in. It's only a door. Use a hammer. In the end, they took that advice, but they also picked up some like metal studs or metal rods and some acid flasks with the idea of basically creating holes, getting the acid in to weaken the stone, and then using these hammers to smash through the door. You know what? That's absolutely brilliant. And this is what they've done. Now, at this point, we were still down 2 characters. We were missing the cleric, we were missing the wizard, which was a bit of a pain because I had actually planned for these 2 characters to be with us on this particular session, and they weren't there. And that's fair enough. Real life gets in the way, Anyway, they put their plan into operation, and it succeeds. They managed to get half the door down, enough to get in to the complex on the other side. And so the session was basically a bit of a dungeon crawl, although in a small sense. This was obviously where Philippe d'Aillon, I think it was Philippe was the name I gave him, was sort of like layering out. And they searched around, and to start with, there wasn't a lot. They found storage rooms and spare bedrooms and things like that. They did stumble upon a library, which was protected by some sort of guardian demon, which I really thought they might have a little bit of trouble with. But they didn't. The paladin didn't even do an awful lot with his smite evil, but it was just a general fact of they were just chipping away at this thing really, really easily. It was like, hey, cool, But now they've got a library, a load of books. Strange, esoteric, arcane books that might actually help them, and they skim through them and then set fire to them. Okay, fair enough. I'm sensing a trend with this particular party. Carrying on round, because this is going to be sort of a short video, because trying to relate a dungeon crawl is really, really boring, and I appreciate that. So they go around and they eventually find these huge sets of doors carved with images of cogs and things, and they decide to leave that alone for now because they don't know what it is, but they will come back to it. I'm trying to think what they do. And basically they have a few small encounters here and there, nothing major, nothing out of the ordinary, until they come across a corner of the dungeon. One area is like a summoning chamber, protected by a pair of wood golems. And I had actually put something in to give them a hand with this, some oil of warped wood. Both of the spellcasters who could ID items weren't there this session. So it was basically stuffed in a backpack and left. So they ended up having a bit of a hard fight or hardish fight, putting these things down. It could have been a little bit easier on them. And then they find Philippe, and he's not in a good way. So basically, he has his own little audience chamber because he's an arrogant so-and-so. Except he's been in communication with things he should not be communicating with. And when they get there, he's basically slumped in his chair and his skin is sort of stretched out in strands, bloody, pulsing strands, across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. He's not in a good way. And they're kind of taken aback a little with this, but they realise that he's actually still alive under all this. And so I don't think they did it out of any sense of niceness or putting him out of his misery, but they figured something was up anyway. And they basically, the party's slayer puts a crossbow bolt into his chest and kills him, which was an act of mercy in my eyes. You know, he was not in a good way. Unfortunately, there is something which in my notes I just described as a vile child thing, which is basically feeding on his mind, really. And unfortunately, they've just killed what it's feeding on. So this thing, this shape that's childlike, starts to crawl through the mesh of pulsing flesh towards them. Unfortunately, what this thing does it basically drains your knowledge, and it gives you the knowledge of the universe. You know, drives you mad somewhat. You can't remember anything of what it's given you if you survive. But unfortunately, the halfling swashbuckler ends up with an intelligence of 3. And he was like that for quite some time. So they're basically having to drag him around. They do manage to defeat this thing relatively easily, but not before it has seriously had terrible effects on the halfling. They managed to get some treasure out of this, which is nice, because one of the things that we had sort of talked about was that there wasn't really a lot of treasure. I like the random roll treasure. I use the Ultimate Equipment book for that. But obviously, it's a bit behind on what they would normally get out of a published scenario. Which on one hand, I don't object to, because I understand the idea that magic items can often unbalance things and break things. But at the same point, I also agree that they were getting a little low on where they should be, especially wealth and stuff. This really came to light when the kineticist came in, and Mr. Shadbolt, the player, asked what his starting money was. And it's like, well, unfortunately, I can't give you what you should be, because you'll be way ahead of the rest of the party. So this was the beginning of a reconciliation. Let's get a bit more treasure. Let's up the effective CR of not in the actual encounters, but for the encounter tables, so you actually get some treasure, because it's like +1 weapons don't appear on that until like you're facing like 7th level opponents, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. So, you know, anyway, I'm diverging. So they're actually beginning to get some treasure. But now they're having to drag the halfling around because he's a child. They try resting up. They get, you know, some health back and use up their potions and wands, which basically leaves them the last half of the dungeon, which is going past those cog doors and things. Now, this is where things get a bit awkward for me. So basically, to cut a long story short, there isn't a lot around there. But they do find records and ledgers, and they find that the Aeon family made its money out of golem construction. So they find all these records. They find out that the son basically had come to the conclusion that his father wasn't actually doing what he was going to, which is to serve these primordials. His father had got to a certain point, he's willing to worship them, he's willing to get some power, but he's not willing to go that step further. And Philippe is. So Philippe has this idea of, they want, whatever it is, to come into the real world or influence the real world or whatever. And he's doing this. He creates his cult. He sends a few of them off to other places. The town of Garnet, where the cult campaign started, being one of them. Sort of splinter selling it a little bit. But there comes a point where even he kind of goes, actually, I don't want them coming into the real world because I'm one of the idiots that lives in it. And he seals his own fate. Once he's set on this path, he can't stop, and that's why he ends up being possessed and dealt with by the vile child thing. So I've got a little bit more information, which is good. So I'm planning on them going back to Garnet in future, but we'll come to that when we come to it. Which leads us back to those big doors. This is the Golem Works. Now, I'm not a nasty DM. Well, I am, but I'm not. So I'm like, you want this treasure. You want, a bit more. You want the dosh. You want the stuff. So this is where the treasure is. So basically, they open the doors, and inside there is a Golem Works for making clay golems. Now, that is slightly above their effective party level. But the treasure's in a big box at the back. And if they're clever, they don't have to fight the golem. I put this in as the option of to kind of show you don't have to fight things to succeed. They could potentially sneak in. The golem's not exactly the most observant thing. They could potentially force it out, lure it out into the corridor, and someone else could go and gather the treasure. It's not like, there are ways of dealing with this that don't involve you running in there. So what do the party do? They run in there. And I'm like, oh, goodness sake, chaps. Now, they take a pummeling and they give a pummeling. And although the party almost dies, they do actually manage to bring the golem down. I was really, really impressed. They took a whumping doing it, though. But they got their treasure. So they had a good bit of stuff to share out. And afterwards, a session, I'm like, I explained to them, it's there to show you that you don't have to fight everything. And one of the responses was, we're not that sort of party. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So, lesson learned on my part. This particular party charges it. So I'm going to have to remember that for future. So basically at this point, they've leveled up. They're 7th now. Now, I'm in a position where I'm like, what do I do next? I kind of, as I said in the very first video for all this was originally a reskinning of Shackled Sea. And as any good campaign does, it's taken on a life of its own and it's moving away from that, which I really, really like. I think if I'd written the entire thing out in advance, it would probably be very much a sort of modified clone. But the players are manipulating the game and they're changing it with their actions and their characters, and it's really, really good. And I'm really pleased. But I wanted something different from here on, because we've done dungeon crawls. This is Pathfinder, which is basically D&D but better. Dungeon crawls is what is the bread and butter, but it can't be everything. So the next session, well, we've had 2 sessions since this one I've just described. 2 sessions? Yes. Well, 2 sessions this weekend, this Easter weekend. And I'm not going to do them until it's complete, because it's a mystery story. And I don't want to give anything away, because I know at least one of the guys. Hi, Mark. watches these videos. So I'm sure he's trying to scout for information. So the next video in this series will actually be a combination of the 2 episodes that I haven't done up to date. But I think you'll enjoy them. Probably a lot more than me burbling on about a dungeon crawl. But I thought, I've got to get this done. I've not had a lot of time to do vids. So I appreciate it's not the greatest vid, but I'm still here, still doing. If you did enjoy it, give us a like, subscribe to the channel. Should have the next video up in the next couple of days, so I hope you look forward to that, and I hope to see you then. Until next time, take care, guys. Thanks for watching. Good gaming.